It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when I decided to take a break from my hectic schedule. I had just finished a meeting at the office, located on the 34th floor of a towering skyscraper in downtown Toronto. My routine was comforting, grabbing a coffee from the Starbucks across the street, then heading to my cozy apartment in the annex for a brief respite before diving back into work. That day, the weather was unusually warm for October, and I decided to stroll through the nearby park. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground, creating an almost serene atmosphere. Everything felt perfectly normal, even relaxing. Later that evening, as I settled into my couch with a book, I heard my phone buzz. It was a Facebook message from an account I didn't recognize. The message read, "I see you're enjoying your evening. I'm watching you." I dismissed it as a prank or a misguided attempt at humor. After all, I often receive strange messages online. Still, the timing felt unnervingly coincidental, and the simplicity of the message made it more unsettling. I decided to block the user and try to put it out of my mind, attributing it to the increasing frequency of online trolls. The next morning, as I prepared for another workday, I noticed something odd. My front door, which I always lock before going to bed, was slightly ajar. I was certain I had locked it the night before. I checked around my apartment, but everything seemed in place, albeit with a subtle sense of unease creeping over me. As I hurried to leave, I noticed a small, unfamiliar object on my doormat, a white feather. I couldn't recall seeing it before, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected to the previous night's message. The day at work was punctuated by an increasing sense of paranoia. Every time I glanced at my phone, I half expected another message from the unknown sender. My usual routines felt off, as if the normal hum of office life had taken on a menacing tone. During lunch, I found myself checking my surroundings more frequently and avoiding eye contact with strangers. The discomfort intensified when I received another message from the same account. "You're not as alone as you think." My attempts to report and block the user seemed futile. They were relentless. When I returned home that evening, I found the white feather had been moved to the inside of my apartment, now placed on my dining table. My heart raced as I realized someone had entered my apartment without my knowledge. I scoured the place for any signs of tampering, but aside from the feather, everything appeared untouched. I called the police, who assured me they would investigate, but their response felt cursory. My mind raced with questions. Who had access to my apartment? Why was this happening to me? As days passed, the unsettling messages continued. They grew increasingly disturbing, with details about my daily activities that no stranger should know. "I saw you at the coffee shop today," one read, followed by, "I know you like the vanilla lattes." Each message was a chilling reminder of how closely someone was monitoring me. I started noticing strange people around my neighborhood, lingering in places where they had no apparent reason to be. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched constantly. One evening, as I was walking home from the subway station, I saw someone following me at a distance. They kept a few steps behind, always just out of sight. I quickened my pace, trying to shake them off, but their footsteps matched mine. I ducked into a nearby store, pretending to browse until the follower disappeared. My anxiety was through the roof, and I knew I needed to be extra cautious. The realization that someone was actively tracking me was terrifying and exhausting. With the constant stress, I decided to stay with a friend for a few nights. We had a barbecue in their backyard, trying to keep things normal and distracted. But even in their company, I couldn't fully relax. I kept checking my phone for new messages, feeling paranoid that someone might be watching from the shadows. During the barbecue, I noticed a stranger lingering across the street, staring at our gathering. When I confronted them, they quickly walked away, leaving me even more on edge. My friend suggested I visit a local private investigator, hoping to get some professional help. The investigator reviewed the messages and my security footage, revealing something chilling. The unknown sender had been in and out of my building's security cameras, often loitering around my floor. They had managed to bypass several security measures. The investigators' findings made it clear that whoever was tormenting me was not just an online threat, but someone with the means to invade my physical space. With this new information, I took precautions to be extra vigilant. I began to notice more discrepancies, like the fact that the maintenance staff in my building seemed unusually interested in my comings and goings. One evening, I decided to confront one of the maintenance workers I'd seen lurking around. He appeared nervous and evasive, which only heightened my suspicions. After a tense exchange, he hurried off, leaving me with an uneasy feeling that he was somehow involved in the creeping horror I was experiencing. The investigators' persistence led to a breakthrough. They traced the Facebook account to a former maintenance worker who had been dismissed from the building several months prior. His name was Daniel, and his dismissal had been under mysterious circumstances. It turned out he had a history of harassment and was skilled in evading detection. As I connected the dots, the horror of knowing that someone with access to my home had been orchestrating this torment was overwhelming. The realization hit hard. Daniel had been watching me, manipulating my sense of security from within. Despite police efforts and the investigators' findings, Daniel was never found. The messages stopped and the physical threats ceased, but the damage lingered. I moved to a new apartment and took extensive measures to secure it. Even now, the feeling of being watched never fully leaves me. The memory of the feather, the strange messages, and the shadowy presence across the street haunt my thoughts. I still question how someone could so thoroughly invade my life, and whether I'm truly safe, or if the threat could resurface. The fear of the unknown lingers, an unsettling reminder of the terror that can hide behind the facade of normalcy. I was enjoying a quiet evening at home, curled up on the couch with a good book and a hot cup of cocoa. My cat, Whiskers, was sprawled lazily beside me, purring softly. It was one of those peaceful nights where everything seemed just right. As I was scrolling through Facebook, a friend request popped up from a name I didn't recognize. Mark Jordan. The profile picture was a standard headshot, and the account was relatively new with only a handful of posts. I hesitated, feeling a bit uneasy, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked accept, thinking it was probably just another local person who found my profile through mutual friends. A day after accepting the friend request, Mark sent me a message. It was a simple, "Hey, how's it going?" with no context or apparent reason for reaching out. I responded politely, mentioning my plans for the weekend. Mark's replies were quick and a bit too personal for someone I had just met online. He asked about my daily routine and even mentioned that he saw my recent post about going to a local park. Something about the way he seemed to know so much felt off, but I brushed it off as a coincidence. After all, people do share a lot online. A few days later, while I was out walking Whiskers in the park near my home, I spotted a man who looked like Mark's profile picture. He was standing by the swings, watching me from a distance. I felt a shiver run down my spine but tried to shake it off. Mark had mentioned enjoying that park in one of his messages, so I convinced myself it was just a random encounter. However, as I left the park, I noticed the same man following at a distance, quickly disappearing when I looked back. My heart raced as I hurried home, wondering if I was just being paranoid. The following week, Mark's messages grew increasingly frequent. He began sending strange, almost unsettling comments about my posts and activities. He seemed to know where I went and what I was doing, even though I never shared specifics. One evening, I received a message from him with a photo of my house taken from the street. It was a clear sign that someone had been watching me. My anxiety grew as I realized that my online interactions were crossing into my real life. I started to worry about my safety and wondered how far this would go. I decided to take a break from social media to avoid further contact with Mark. A few days passed without any messages, and I hoped the situation was over. But then, my friend Lisa went missing. We had planned to meet for coffee, but she never showed up, and her phone was unreachable. The police were involved, and there were no leads. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's sudden silence and Lisa's disappearance were somehow connected. The fear that Mark might be involved was too overwhelming to ignore, so I decided to dig deeper. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I noticed a strange shadow moving outside my kitchen window. I thought it was just my imagination, but when I checked, I found a tiny, inconspicuous camera hidden among the bushes. My heart pounded as I realized someone had been spying on me. I immediately called the police and showed them the camera. They took it in for examination, but the thought of someone watching me made it hard to sleep. I felt trapped in my own home, unable to escape the constant feeling of being observed. Desperate for answers, I reached out to mutual friends who might know something about Mark. One friend mentioned that Mark had been acting strangely for weeks, disappearing from social events and becoming increasingly reclusive. This friend also mentioned that Mark had recently been fired from his job and was struggling with personal issues. I felt a mix of relief and dread. Knowing Mark had issues didn't make him any less dangerous. It only made his behavior more unpredictable. I knew I had to stay vigilant. Determined to confront my fears, I decided to meet Mark in person. I arranged to meet him at a coffee shop, hoping to get some answers. Mark arrived early and seemed oddly calm, as if he had been expecting me. When I asked him directly about his intentions and why he had been following me, his demeanor changed. He became defensive and evasive, insisting that he meant no harm. The conversation was tense, and I left feeling more unsettled than ever. Mark's erratic behavior left me wondering if I could trust my own instincts. A few days later, I received a message from Mark with an unsettling confession. He admitted to stalking me, saying he was obsessed with me and couldn't control his impulses. He revealed that he had been following me, watching my every move and even taking pictures of me for months. The confession was chilling, and I felt a surge of panic. I realized that Mark's obsession was far more dangerous than I had initially thought. His messages were now filled with threats, making it clear that he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. I decided to take matters into my own hands and began searching for any clues that could help me understand Mark better. I researched his background, trying to piece together his history and find out if he had a criminal record or any known issues. My investigation led me to a disturbing discovery. Mark had been involved in several similar incidents in the past, but none had been reported to the police. This revelation made me realize how serious the situation was and how crucial it was to stay ahead of him. The situation reached its climax one night when Mark showed up at my house unannounced. I was alone, and the sight of him standing on my doorstep sent me into a panic. I called the police and locked all doors and windows, but Mark seemed determined to get inside. As I waited for the police to arrive, Mark pounded on the door and tried to break in. The terror of that night was beyond anything I had ever experienced. When the police finally arrived, Mark fled, leaving behind a trail of broken glass and a message scrawled on my door. In the aftermath, the police were able to catch Mark, but the emotional scars remained. Lisa was never found, and the authorities couldn't link Mark to her disappearance conclusively. As I tried to return to normalcy, I was haunted by the thought that Mark might have been responsible for more than just stalking. I often wondered if there were others out there like him, waiting in the shadows. The truth remained elusive, and the fear of what might have happened still lingers, leaving me forever changed by the terrifying ordeal. It was just another typical Saturday in my suburban life. The sun was shining brightly over the neatly trimmed lawns of our quiet neighborhood in Oakwood. I had spent the morning running errands, picking up groceries from the local Safeway and grabbing coffee from the Starbucks on Elm Street. Everything seemed calm and predictable, a routine I found comforting. As I walked my dog, Max, through the familiar paths of our community park, I reflected on the upcoming neighborhood barbecue, a summer tradition that everyone looked forward to. Little did I know, this ordinary day was about to take a turn that would shatter the tranquility of my life. Later that afternoon, as I was putting away the groceries, I noticed something odd in the yard. A small black bag had been left on our doorstep. It wasn't there when I first left for errands, and it wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect in a quiet neighborhood like ours. The bag was worn and had a peculiar, almost ominous aura. I hesitated before picking it up, my curiosity piqued, but my instincts telling me to be cautious. I decided to open it, and inside I found a single, dusty photograph of a young woman I didn't recognize, her face obscured by shadows, and a note that simply read, "I'm watching you." The photograph and the note rattled me more than I cared to admit. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease by continuing with my day. Yet as the evening approached, I started noticing subtle changes in my routine. The lights seemed dimmer, and every sound outside my window felt amplified. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was keeping an eye on me. During the barbecue that night, I scanned the crowd for any unfamiliar faces, but everyone appeared to be a regular neighbor. However, the nagging feeling that something was wrong persisted, gnawing at my peace of mind. The next day, while taking Max for his morning walk, I encountered a man I had never seen before. He was standing at the end of my street, his gaze fixed intently on me as I approached. His demeanor was oddly calm, but there was something unsettling about the way he watched me. I tried to make eye contact and offer a friendly greeting, but he only nodded slightly and turned away. My unease grew when I realized he had been lingering at the edge of my street for quite some time, and it made me wonder if he was somehow connected to the mysterious bag and the note from the previous day. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of paranoia. Every time I left the house, I felt as if I was being watched. The stranger's appearance lingered in my mind, and I began to notice small, inexplicable things. My car's position seemed slightly altered, and there were faint, muddy footprints on my porch. I tried to rationalize these occurrences, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. Yet the creeping fear that someone was observing my every move became impossible to ignore, casting a shadow over my daily life. One evening, as I was checking my phone, I received a Facebook message from an unknown account. The message was cryptic and chilling. "You're not as safe as you think." I immediately tried to trace the account but found it had been deactivated. Panic set in as I realized the threat was not just a random act but a direct challenge to my safety. I began to worry that my online presence had somehow been compromised and that someone was deliberately trying to intimidate me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my personal space was being invaded in a way I couldn't fully understand. Desperate to confront my fears, I decided to visit the local police station and report the incidents. As I walked through the neighborhood towards the station, I noticed the same mysterious man from before, lurking in the shadows of an alley. He watched me intently as I passed, but when I tried to approach him, he vanished into the darkness. The encounter left me feeling more vulnerable than ever. The fact that he seemed to know where I would be made it clear that he was more than just a random stranger. He was someone who had been tracking my movements closely. Feeling increasingly unsafe, I began taking extra precautions. I installed security cameras around my home and started varying my daily routine to avoid predictability. Despite these measures, I still felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The cameras occasionally caught strange movements in the middle of the night, but the footage was always too blurry to make out any details. The constant anxiety was wearing me down, and I couldn't tell if I was genuinely in danger or if my own fears were making me see threats where there were none. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront the man directly. Armed with my phone and a sense of determination, I set out to track him down, following the route he had taken as seen in the security footage. The trail led me through dark, deserted streets and into an unfamiliar part of town. My heart raced as I finally spotted him in the distance. He seemed to notice me and began to run. I chased him through the winding streets, but despite my efforts, he always stayed just out of reach. The chase ended abruptly when he disappeared into a dense thicket, leaving me alone and exhausted. The next day, I received a phone call from an anonymous number. A chilling voice on the other end told me, "You shouldn't have followed him." My heart pounded as the realization hit me. I had walked into a dangerous game I didn't fully understand. Fearing for my safety, I contacted the police again, but they were skeptical, suggesting that I might be overreacting. Feeling abandoned and helpless, I began to question my own sanity. Was there truly a threat, or was I spiraling into paranoia? In the weeks that followed, the man's presence and the threatening messages ceased, but the fear never fully left me. I continued to live with the lingering anxiety that something could happen at any moment. The mystery of who the man was and why he targeted me remained unresolved, leaving me with an unsettling feeling that I was forever being watched. The events had left a permanent scar on my sense of security, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, forever haunted by the knowledge that someone had once turned my life into a terrifying ordeal.